Evening, everybody. We are back for round two here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Give me just 1 second while I get that popped up here. Make sure everything is up and running. Okay, got the screen share going. I'm going to drop us into presentation mode. It should say on the screen how to start seeds indoors and get thriving seedlings. So we'll give it a minute just for everything to get up and running here. But I can see, that we are now live. It looks like the screen share is going. So let me know in the chat function if you're able to see my screen. It should say how to start seeds indoors and get thriving seedlings. Thank you, Anthony. Love to hear that. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Let us know in the chat function, folks. Where are you joining us from this evening? Where is everybody joining us from? Hey, Cheryl, great to have you. Always love to see you online here. Hey, Lori. Right on. Let us know in the chat function where you're joining from this evening. And we're going to go ahead and start kicking straight into things. Now, for those of you that were online last week, obviously had a bit of a technical glitch there. I do know that we have a lot of new folks that have joined for this week that weren't part of last week. So we are going to go through the full presentation, which does mean that the first kind of like 15 minutes or so will be a bit of a repeat. But I do want everybody to see that because it's super important stuff. And then from there, we'll cover off on the rest of the materials. And then we will go from there into how to actually go about utilizing all the different materials for starting seeds, getting them absolutely thriving indoors. But to begin diving in and kicking off here for the evening, I'm joined by Kirsten at West Coast Seeds. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to her for a quick introduction.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Kirsten, as Jordan mentioned. I'm currently the farm sales coordinator at West Coast Seeds. So I'm helping support farmers get their seeds so that they can grow them and then bring them to farmers markets and CSAs near you. Last year, I was our farm trial coordinator at West Coast Seeds. So I grew all of our plants out, trialing everything, making sure everything is good to grow for all of you. I was checking out everything that we now carry this year and looking forward to future years as well. So lots of good varieties to come. I've been farming for about 4 years now, and I'm also a newbie patio grower. So I'll be out there growing in my little east facing balcony soon.
Amazing. Love it, love it, love it. And folks, let us know in the chat function, how many years have you been starting seeds for indoors? Is this your first attempt at starting seeds indoors? Your second, your third, your fourth, maybe your 10th, 11th, 12th? Let us know in the chat function what number of years you've been starting seeds indoors for. As a couple of those roll through, for those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jordan, and I'm one of the brand ambassadors here at West Coast Seeds. And when I'm not doing little engagements like this with West Coast Seeds, I've got my own little gardening business called Mind and Soil, where I'm really just kind of looking to help introduce as many people to gardening as possible, help them getting their hands dirty. And there's one thing that everybody needs to know about me, and it's going to become abundantly clear over the course of this session, and that is that I love to run experiments. I absolutely love experiments. And there's a couple of reasons why I love running different gardening experiments. The first one is that I want to help save you all of the kind of like years and the time that it takes to run all these different experiments. So rather than you having to figure out how to start seeds over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, I want to share with you everything that I've learned on that front. On top of that, I want to save you the hundreds, in some instances, the thousands of dollars on materials and tools, and share with you which ones really work and are good to have in the mix and which ones you can totally pass on. And like on this front, this year, I've already spent probably about $2,000 on materials, not because they're things that I necessarily need, but because I want to figure out like what actually are the best materials for starting seeds so I can pass all of those learnings along to each and every one of you. And when you combine both of those, my hope is that all these learnings, all this experimentation helps you have your biggest harvest ever and your most enjoyable gardening season ever. So to kind of illustrate that a little bit with a bit of an example, I want to take you back in time about 5 years to when I first tried starting seeds. And for any of you that are mentioning there, it's your first year of starting seeds. this is what things were looking like for me in my first year of starting seeds. I got some germination. Things are growing a little bit, but things aren't doing well by any stretch of the imagination, especially these over here looking really leggy. But since that point in time, 5 years ago till now, I've started probably like thousands and thousands of seeds. I've trialed all these different materials. I've really started to figure out like, what do seedlings need to thrive? So now you look at the exact same types of seeds, the exact same varieties, started on the exact same day, but now this is what my seedlings are looking like. So I did this earlier this year. I started a set of seeds the exact same way as my very first year, and then I started the exact same seeds, but utilizing everything that I've learned over the course of the last 5 years. And as you can see, night and day different. And this is going to be what's happening for each and every one of you this year. You're going to be having absolutely beautiful, thriving seedlings just like that. So if you're all set and ready for us to begin diving into the different pieces to go about getting thriving seedlings, type into the chat function, "Let's grow." And as those roll into the chat there, the way that we're going to go ahead and kind of like break this lesson down is that we're first going to go through the different materials. What are the different materials that you need to have on hand in order to get thriving seedlings? And then once we go through the materials, Kirsten and I are going to pause and answer a couple of questions. So if you do have questions that pop up over the course of the session, go ahead and just fire those into the chat function, and we'll pause about halfway through to answer a few. And then from there, we're going to go back into things, and we'll walk you through step by step how to actually go about utilizing those materials to start the seeds. And then we'll open up for more Q&A at the end there. Okay, Jen's saying let's grow. Joy's saying let's grow. Jeff's saying let's grow. Everybody's saying let's grow. Let's start diving into it with our materials. And there's only 6 materials that I like to have on hand and utilize when it comes to starting seeds. First one should be fairly self-explanatory. And if we want to be starting seeds indoors, we of course need to have seeds on hand. And on this front, I'm of course very partial to West Coast Seeds. They've been a huge support to me with all of the experimentation that I do, kind of providing me with seeds to run in those experiments. But one quick story on top of that is that before I bought this house about 6 years ago in July, it was a Monday evening, and I put the offer in for the house around 6 p.m. I got the accepted offer on the house around 10 p.m. And so the next morning, you would think the first thing that you'd be doing is maybe going to your lawyer and like beginning to work through the paperwork, or going to the bank to begin lining up the finances. The first thing I did on Tuesday morning was I went to Art and Naps, which was my local nursery. I bought a whole bunch of seeds from West Coast Seeds because I thought, if I start these seeds right now in early July, I can get them transplanted in the garden the day that I take possession and maybe be able to squeak out a little bit of a fall crop. So ever since that point in time, been utilizing West Coast Seeds and having tons of success with it. Now, what I will say on this front is that what's even more important than the brand of seeds that you go with is ensuring that you're utilizing newly packaged seeds. And so this was an experiment that I was really curious about a few years ago, and it's the first experiment that we're going to go through this evening. I wanted to see, do seeds that were packaged for this year germinate just as well as seeds that are maybe 3 years old or 5 years old? And so I put it to the test in the form of an experiment. And the way that I went about doing this was I found a bunch of packs of seeds that were packed for 3 years old, 5 years old, as well as for this season. And what I then did was I took 10 seeds from each of those packets. Those are packaged for that year. Then 10 from the exact same variety, but were packaged 3 years ago. And then the same thing, but 5 years ago. Put them into paper towel, moisten that paper towel, and then put it into a little Ziploc bag to run a germination test so I could see what difference in germination do we see for new seeds versus seeds that are 3 years old versus seeds that are 5 years old. And at the end of that experiment, those that were packaged for this season had about a 90% germination rate. So really, really good germination rates. Now, those that were 3 years old, that number dropped to about 25%. And once I got to 5 years old, not a single one of those seeds were germinating. So the last thing that you want to do is kind of like start a whole bunch of seeds, but those seed packets be 4 years old. And then you're gonna be sitting there wondering like, why are none of my seeds germinating when you might have done everything right and just been utilizing old seeds? So if you do have any older seeds, what I would encourage you to do is first run a germination test, just like the one that I showed. So take 10 of them, put them in paper towel, spritz that paper towel with a little bit of water so that it's moist, and then slide it into a little Ziploc baggie in a room that's about 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. And that's going to show you if they're still viable and germinating. If they are, then by all means utilize them, because you could have stored and saved them in a better way than those ones that I was utilizing in this experiment. And then if you aren't getting a germination rate on them, well, now you know that before starting all of your seeds, you can get new seed packets and then have a lot more success and really be off on a good start with your indoor seed starting. So first material are seeds. Now, if we have seeds on hand, the next thing that we of course need is something to be putting them into, and that is seedling mix. And once again, you all know me, I love experimenting. And so for the last 5 years, I've been playing around with different seedling mixes, kind of coming up with different recipes, trying to figure out what is the best seedling mix for seeds to be growing in. And right now, like this Saturday or next Saturday, I'm going to publish this video on my YouTube channel, but I tested 7 different seedling mixes side by side to see how big of a difference the seedling mix has on how well those seedlings grow. So to walk you through this, these 7 different seedling mixes that I trialed, the first was native soil. I literally went out in the pouring rain into my backyard, dug up a whole bunch of native soil, sifted it, and then utilized that for the environment. The second one was 100% compost. This is kind of like that Charles Dowding, no dig, no till environment, more of a regenerative approach. The third one is an absolute classic, and that is Miracle-Gro. So I went to actually onto Amazon for this one, but you'd see Miracle-Gro at your nursery, your hardware store, etc. I wanted to see how it performs. The fourth one was one of the Pro Mix products. And then after that, I trialed my recipe from last year. This is my kind of like 3.0 seedling mix that I've been experimenting and playing around with. But then, because I'm always tweaking things, trying to improve things, change things, etc., I also did a 4.0 recipe, so a new one for this season. And then the 7th and final environment was same 4.0 recipe, but also with liquid fertilizer. And so what you can see here is these are all the different environments. So native soil, 100% compost, Miracle-Gro, Pro Mix, and then Mind and Soil version 3.0, Mind and Soil version 4.0, and then Mind and Soil version 4.0 with the liquid fertilizer. As you can see, I am quite obsessive with keeping everything the exact same, ensuring that we're really getting to the bottom of the singular variable that I'm trying to test. In this particular instance, the seedling mix. So you fast forward from this day, 30 days, and I had my results for how each of the different environments grew. And I want to show you just a few of them. So the first one is the native soil. And what we can see here is that there is certainly germination, there is some growth, but they're not, absolutely thriving by any stretch. Now, one thing I will say here, and like this is totally user error on my behalf, is that these and the next 2 that I'm going to show you are looking a little bit leggy. And that's just because I hadn't done my grow light experiment yet, which I'm going to share in just a minute. So that was the only kind of like issue at the moment here, is that they were looking a little bit leggy. Now, when you fast forward to the next environment, that is the Miracle-Gro environment. And so now they're in a bit of a different environment and they've grown a little bit bigger. But now when you fast forward to adding in some compost, which is a big component of what I have in my new Mind and Soil version 4.0 mixture, look at this. This is how much bigger they grew through all that experimentation and tweaking of those different recipes over the course of the last 5 years. So 2 things here that I want you to take away from this. If you did want to get your hands on any of this Mind and Soil version 4.0 mixture, there's a link to it in the description. But if you want to just make it on your own, I also want to set you up for success on that front. So if you want to make your own DIY seedling mix, what I want you to do is get some seed starting mix. So whether that's Miracle-Gro or Pro Mix, basically anything that's primarily either peat moss or cocoa coir with some perlite in it. So that's the first part. And then the second part is I want you to get really good, high quality, fresh compost. And then once you have that compost on hand, I want you to put it through either a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch sift. That's going to get rid of any bigger pieces of wood or any larger debris. So you're left with just really, really fine, beautiful, fresh compost. Now, the only other thing that you need to do is combine those 2 together and do that at the ratios of 2 parts seed starting mix, 1 part fresh compost. So again, 2 parts seed starting mix, 1 part fresh compost, mix that up into a really nice homogeneous mixture, and then plant directly into that. You're going to have absolutely thriving seedlings. So that is our second material that makes a huge difference when it comes to starting our seeds, is having a good seedling mix on hand. Now that we've got those two pieces done, we've got seeds, we've got seedling mix, we need something to be putting them into. And so material number 3 are seed cells and trays. And this is a fairly straightforward one. Really, it doesn't make too big of a difference in terms of the growth of the plant, whether you're starting or kind of what type of material you're starting in. And for myself personally, I prefer to start all of my seeds in these 3-inch seed cells. There's 2 reasons why I like to do that. The first is that for seeds to germinate and begin growing, they need to be in a warm environment and they need moisture. And so these 3-inch seed cells are a little bit larger. And what that results in is that they hold on to more moisture for a longer period of time, making it a little bit easier for them to germinate than if they're in a 1-inch plug. So you could use one of those, like those smaller, like 1-inch plugs. If you do that, just make sure that you're really on top of your watering so that they don't dry up, because they will dry up a lot quicker than these 3-inch seed cells. And then the second reason why, which is a big one for me, is that even if I were to start them in those 1-inch seed cells, I'd need to pot them up into a 3-inch seed cell after about 14 to 21 days. So for myself, I'm like, well, why not just save that step and just start them all in 3-inch seed cells? I'm going to need to have that much space in my seed starting station anyways. So that's why I start all of my seeds in 3-inch seed cells. And then what I like to do is just utilize some of these 10, 20 trays as well. Just makes it really easy for moving things around. Okay. Those are our first 3 materials all done and dusted. We've got 3 more materials. Then we're going to pause for a couple of questions. What I will say is that the 4th material is hands down the most important material when it comes to starting seeds indoors. So if there's anything that you take away from this session, it's what we're going to cover off on in terms of the 4th material. So the 4th material that we want to have on hand is a grow light. And so this is another area that I've been really, really curious about over the course of the last 5 years. And of course, you know by now, I had to put it to test in the form of an experiment. Now, I'm not sure if anybody's had that experience where you go online to something like Amazon and you look up a grow light and all of a sudden it's like 60 pages of all these different grow light options. They all seem to have like 1,200 5-star reviews. How do you actually know like which one has performed well or will perform well and which ones won't perform well? I've been in that scenario. It's really stressed me out before. And so what I decided to do for this season, I was like, heck, you know what? I'm just going to buy a whole bunch of these and then test the exact same seeds underneath them. So I bought a $30 grow light from Amazon and I set that up. I also bought a $75 grow light. This is the Monios grow light. I also bought a $100 grow light. This is the Vivosun VS1000. I also bought a $300 grow light. This is the Spider Farmer grow light. And then I also started the exact same set of seeds as I had under each of those 4 environments in a windowsill. So something that all of us have access to. And now for myself, I personally, and it could be, totally different for anybody else, but I personally am not a fan of utilizing a windowsill, even if it's south facing, for starting my seeds. And I want to explain and kind of highlight to you why that's the case. So when we take a look at the seeds that I have in the windowsill, I grab my light meter app and I put it right over top of them. And I got a reading of 1,000 lux. Now, at the moment, that's, a little bit just kind of like just a bit of a number. But let's now take a look at how that compares to underneath the different grow light environments. So underneath the Sondico environment, this is the $30 grow light, that number actually decreased to 498 lux. So even less light than what was coming through that windowsill. But now when we go up to the Monios environment, that number climbs all the way up to 10,600 lux. And then we go underneath both the Vivosun and the Spider Farmer environments, that number climbed all the way up to 85,000 lux. So we're getting anywhere from like 10 times to 85 times more light underneath these grow lights than what I was getting in my windowsill. On top of that, the thing about these grow lights versus a windowsill is that, the last 3 days, it has been completely raining where I live. I have not seen the sun in 3 days. So the amount of light would be even lower during that time. And then on top of that, it's earlier in the year right now. They wouldn't even be getting necessarily the 12 to 16 hours that they would be growing most or like growing best underneath. So underneath the grow light, though, it's going to be 85,000 lux or 10,000 lux the entire time. And we can program it so that it runs for 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours, and it will do that every single day. So those are a couple of the reasons why I personally prefer a grow light. But what difference did it actually have on the growth of the plants? Well, like I said, I started the exact same seeds in each of those environments. So let's now take a look at how they were growing after 30 days. So the windowsill, these are the seedlings, what they look like after 30 days. We had germination, but we haven't really put on very much growth. So let's move on to the next environment, the first grow light. And I'd say these ones are like similar or potentially in some instances, like over here, even a little bit worse. And this is the grow light that I used in my very first year of starting seeds. Obviously, didn't have tons of success with it. Now let's move up to the Monios grow light at $75. And in that environment, we certainly have a lot more growth in this instance. And what I will say right now is that this would be even better if I kept the grow light a little bit closer to the plants, but I wanted to keep all the grow lights the same distance away from the plants for this particular experiment. So, the tomatoes here, the lettuce, they are looking a little bit leggy, but if I kept that grow light a little bit lower, they'd be doing even better. Now let's fast forward to the $100 grow light. That is the VivoSun grow light. And as you can see here, like these are quite literally picture perfect seedlings. Like I've never had lettuce, basil, broccoli looking this perfect 30 days into the season. Like the basil is already ready to be starting to get harvested and put into meals. So I was absolutely thrilled with how it performed. But what about the $300 grow light? Well, as we can see here, the Spider Farmer grow light also thinks grew really well. Nothing is leggy, but not really more growth than what we're seeing in the $100 environment with the VivoSun. And so I took a picture of them side by side as well. And what we can see is that actually the VivoSun ones ended up growing, I'd say, a little bit bigger, either very similar or potentially even a little bit larger. And so I'm actually right now like in the process of beginning to switch all of my grow lights over to them. You can see I've got the box right here. I'll actually show you. I've got another experiment going right beside me here where I'm now comparing them at different light heights and distances away from the grow lights. So I've been a huge fan of that one, and I'm in the process of beginning to move all of my grow lights over to them. Now, if anybody did want to get their hands on one of the VivoSun grow lights, the team from VivoSun actually literally just like 2 hours ago gave me a code to get 15% off of your order. So if you go into the link down in the description of the video here, you'll find links to where you can buy those grow lights. And there's a code, it's just Mind and Soil, and that's going to give you 15% off your order. So was super excited to be able to pass that along to everybody. And Sylvia's mentioning in the chat function, VivoSun is now 159 plus tax. That is my fault. I sold them out of their inventory in Canada. So they've kind of like, I guess, rejigged things since I shared some of these results a little bit earlier. So my apologies on that front. There is another one though. It's the Arrow, and it is, I think, like 129. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. All right, that is material number 4. The 5th material is a really straightforward, really easy one, and that is a thermometer. Now, remember from just a couple of minutes ago, I shared with you that in order for our seeds to germinate and begin growing, they need to be in an environment that is both with moisture as well as with warmth. And so you know what I did here, folks. A couple of years ago, I ran an experiment where I started seeds in 3 different environments. I started the exact same seeds in a room that was 50 Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius, another set of seeds in a room that was 60 Fahrenheit, 15 Celsius, and another set of the exact same seeds in a room that was 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. I hope, if nothing less, that I'm saving you a whole bunch of years in terms of wondering, about the temperature, the grow light, so on and so forth, with all these experiments that I've done. So you then fast forward to see what the results were in this experiment. Take a look at this. Those seeds that I started in the 50 Fahrenheit room, about 10 Celsius, literally hardly any of them even germinated. Then we go to the 60 Fahrenheit room, 15 Celsius. We have some germination. We have a little bit of growth, but nothing amazing. And then when we go to the 70 Fahrenheit environment, 20 Celsius, everything is germinating. Everything is absolutely thriving. So I really encourage you to have a thermometer on hand. You can get it from like a dollar store for like $1, something like that. And it just have that on hand to ensure that the area, the ambient temperature is at least 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. And it's for this reason that I actually encourage people not to utilize a heating mat. And the reason why is because we could put a heating mat underneath those seeds, but that's actually what's considered an acute heat source. So it's going to heat the seedling mix up. They're going to germinate, but it's too hot actually to leave them on there. So as soon as they germinate, you need to take them off of that heating mat. And if that room is only 60 Fahrenheit, 15 Celsius, well, then they're going to grow more like this. So what I actually encourage everybody to do is if you have a little space heater laying around, is pop that into your seed starting area for the month or so that you're starting those seeds, to ensure that the area is staying at least 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. And personally, I'm even going a little bit warmer than this now. I'm going more like 22, 23 Celsius, 75 Fahrenheit. Plants are growing really, really well when that's kind of like the temperature that we're working with. Okay, we are now on to our sixth material. And like I said, we're going to pause for a little bit of Q&A after the materials here. So if you have any questions, fire a couple of those in the chat function. We'll answer 2 or 3 before we go through the method, and then we'll answer all the remaining questions at the very end of the session. So the sixth and final material is the turkey baster. And this, I promise you, is my favorite watering tool. It's got like that really nice long neck on it. So it allows you to kind of like start dodging and getting through all your plants as they begin to grow and ensure that you're getting the water right down to the soil. So all of it's going into the soil where the roots are going to be. And then on top of that, since it holds like a specific amount of water, it really slows down our watering. It's not like we can just be like spraying them with a hose or something like that. It slows that whole process down, which ensures that the water actually works its way into the seedling mix. So still to this day, and I've tried all kinds of fancy different like watering devices and whatnot, I keep coming back to the turkey baster. Believe me, it is absolutely wonderful. All right, so those are our 6 materials. One additional material that I just quickly want to touch on that I'd put almost into like the must-have category. It's getting close, not quite there yet because I need to do a little bit more experimentation with it, but that is an oscillating fan. If you have one on hand, that you have, kind of in storage until the summertime, pull it out, put it into your seed starting station. And the reason why is because it helps simulate wind. So it's kind of like helping us create a more natural environment. That wind's going to push the little seedlings around. That's going to help them grow a little bit stronger and more sturdy. It's also going to dry out the seedling mix more quickly, which is a bit more of a natural environment for the seedlings to be living in. And that, both of those combined, is going to result in the seedlings being better prepared for moving out into the garden. And what I like to do is once I'm done with my heater and keeping it, really nice and warm, is I just switch it onto the fan setting, turn it on to oscillating, and I just give them a nice gentle breeze for the remainder of the time underneath the grow lights. So that was a lot of information that we covered there in terms of materials. But like I said, everything I really swear by from all the experimentation that I've done. I'm going to leave this up here for a minute or two while we answer a couple of questions, just so that you can write down any of these pieces in case you didn't get them while I was going through them. Okay, let's see here. So question came through, what's the app you're using to measure the light? It's called Light Meter. So that is the app that I use on that one. Now, let's pass this one over to Kirsten here. For cooler weather crops, when do you go about, you kind of like either starting those ones outdoors or transplanting those into the outdoor environment?
So yeah, so for cooler weather crops, so we could be talking lettuce or kale, broccoli. Normally, you don't need to start those too early indoors. You do have the option of starting them directly outdoors or giving them a 3 to 4 week start inside. They don't need to be nearly as hot as your peppers, as your tomatoes. If anything, actually, lettuce can enter something called thermal dormancy if it's too hot. So you actually want to keep that one a little bit cooler than the rest. You definitely don't want to put those on a heat mat. But yeah, it does not need to be too warm outside to transplant those outside. It's generally just after your last frost, and they can handle that cool weather quite nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to like expand on that even a little bit, we've got cooler weather crops and then we've got warmer weather crops. So think like tomatoes, peppers, squashes, cucumbers. Those are our warmer weather crops, and we wouldn't want those outside. I like to aim for when the average nighttime low is around 10 Celsius or 50 Fahrenheit. You could go a little bit cooler, but in that range is what you're looking for. But those cooler weather crops, we can have them out there even earlier than that. So what I like to do is I start my cooler weather crops, things, especially things like lettuces and arugula, etc. And I'll grow those from, kind of like, again, like in and around like that last frost, all the way up until when I transplant in those warmer weather crops. So I basically grow them, get a full season of lettuces, radishes, etc., harvest all of them once it's time and warm enough for those warmer crops to be going out. And it's kind of like a cool way of doing an early succession planting that allows you to get stuff out and into the garden, but it's all crops that are going to have like anywhere from a 40 to 70-day growing window. And then you can just pull them out when you're all set and ready to begin putting in your warmer weather crops. I know that there's always a big like urge to like, oh, I want to get everything into the garden. But I found for myself, this is a really nice way to kind of like quench that thirst that I have to get things into the garden, while also ensuring that I'm not transplanting my warm weather crops too early on. Okay, let's see. Next question here. Let's see. Question from Lori here, Kirsten, is can I leave germinated seeds on a heating mat?
That's not really the best practice to leave them on a heat mat. As you previously mentioned, it is quite warm, and the growing temperature is not the same as the germination temperature of a seed. So you are more likely to dry out your soil mix. You could potentially damage the roots if they're getting too close to that bottom surface of the heat mat. You're costing energy. There's just lots of reasons why you don't need to have them, and it's not best to keep them on a heat mat. Unless you're keeping them in a room that is going to be colder. So if it's not in your regular house, it's in a garage or something, um, it could be best if you have if something like a heating fan isn't going to work because it's too large of a space. You might want to have heat mats. Another option is to have uh, a heater, but also kind of enclose a space with some plastic. You could put some curtains up. You could kind of create this little microclimate within your garage. That's probably a better option than using the heat mats. So yeah,
I
all
like
things to consider.
I totally I agree with that so strongly that like I think heating mats will give you like a false sense of confidence because they're going to help things germinate. But again, if it's in a room that's like 60 Fahrenheit, 15 Celsius, then they're not going to grow as well as soon as you move them off of those heating mats. And so I've done exactly what Kirsten alluded to there in terms of kind of like creating like a DIY barricade. I literally take like bed sheets that we aren't using right now in the house, and I put them like basically like staple or tape them to the walls, so they close that area, and I put the little heater in there so that only that small area in my downstairs environment is needing to warm up, not the whole area or anything along those lines. So yeah, you can absolutely get creative. Even if you have like a spare bathroom or you have a spare room, just close the door on it. And again, because the light is all coming from a grow light now, you don't need it to necessarily even have a window on it. Like mine, there's zero window in that area whatsoever. So completely agree with that. All righty. Let's answer one more question here before we go into the method for starting seeds indoors. And I'd also, before we do that, I'd love to hear in the chat function, how has this been so far? Has this been valuable? Are you getting learnings from this? Let us know in the chat function if this has been useful so far. All right, so Kirsten, last question here, a little bit different than seed starting, but what do you succession plant after planting garlic? So you harvest your garlic. Is there anything that you like to plant in succession following it?
I think you could definitely do lots of your fall crops for sure. Um, yeah, it doesn't, there's not a huge gap in there. So you could put maybe in like a short little month-long crop, but you're kind of in the peak of the summer. So greens aren't really going to do so well. So I'd probably wait to plant a fall crop like some brassicas or something along those lines. Yeah, what do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, and so this is one that I have a lot of fun with actually. And so if you're like super eager to get the absolute most out of your garden, your garlic, you're going to be harvesting that in late July. Let's say July 21st. What I actually do is on July 1st, about 20 days earlier, I start a whole set of seeds in seed cells because I can't put them into the actual garden beds because the garlic's still in there. I'm going to harvest it, rip it all out. But what I do is I start a whole bunch of broccoli, and cabbages in seed cells. And so then they germinate in the seed cells. They begin growing for the first 3 weeks in the seed cells. And then when I get to around July 20th, I harvest all of that garlic out and then I amend that bed and then I transplant in the broccoli and the cabbage seedlings. So they now get to grow through the end of July, through August, through September. And what ends up being so perfect is I'm not sure if anybody's tried growing broccoli or cabbages, when you'd be starting them right now and they hit maturity in late June, July. That's when the temperatures are getting hottest. And that makes it the kind of like most likely time for them to bolt and go to flower. It's like that broccoli head that like just starts to form and then it shoots into a whole ton of flowers. That's happening because of how hot it is. But when you do it as a succession crop, you're starting them at July 1st, transplanting them on July 21st in and around there. They're then hitting maturity as we're getting into October. And what's happening is the temperature is getting cooler and cooler. So the likelihood of them bolting going to flower is basically none. It's not going to happen. So you end up with these absolutely beautiful, delicious cabbage heads, broccoli heads, etc., because there's none of that bolting pressure on them anymore. So that's one of the favorite ones for me from a succession planting perspective. All right, love hearing all the kind of excellent information that's been helpful. Love to hear all that. Let's move on to the second part of this evening's session. And folks, the good news about this is that like the method for actually going about starting seeds, once we have the right materials on hand, is so easy, so straightforward. So we're gonna like breeze through this in probably like 10 minutes tops, and then we're gonna open it up for more Q&A. So only about kind of like 10 more minutes of curriculum learnings here. All right, so when it comes to the method for starting seeds, it's honestly just like 5 steps that I go through, and I'm gonna walk through each of them here. So the very first thing that we need to do is fill up our 3-inch seed cells with our seedling mix of choice to about 1 centimeter from the top. So as you can see, I'm just going one by one, filling them up. And you could either leave a little bit of space on the top, or you could even like stack one on top of the other just to like compact it a little bit, get a little bit of that air out of there. But you want to have about 1 centimeter of space at the top. After you've done that, it should be looking kind of like this. We've got a nice little like body of seedling mix here, and then we've got a little bit of space at the top as well. Now, once you've done that, again, for seeds to germinate, they need warmth and they need moisture. And I like to do my watering in rounds to ensure that the water is actually making its way into the seedling mix and not just falling off to the side. So the next thing that we're going to do is begin moistening the seedling mix. And so what I like to do is I grab my turkey baster and I do 1 turkey baste in each of the seed cells that I'm starting. So I go from 1 seed cell to the next, and I'm just adding a little like 1 turkey baste of water into each and every one of them. That ensures that we've got some moisture in there. Now, once we've got our first round of water in there, the next thing that we're going to do is place 3 to 5 seeds into each one of these seed cells. So if I wanted, let's say tomatoes, and if you're, very comfortable and confident with your seed starting, then only put 3 tomato seeds in there. We want at least one of them to germinate. If you're on the newer side to gardening, put 5 in there. That's going to just give you a higher likelihood of at least one of them germinating. And as you go from, year 1 to year 2 to year 3, 4, 5, you're going to get a bit of a feel for like, okay, I know that my tomatoes germinate at a 80% germination rate. So I really only need to have 2 or 3 seeds in there. But again, to increase your likelihood of having all the plants that you want ultimately begin germinating and growing underneath the grow lights, put anywhere from between 3 to 5 seeds into each one of those seed cells. And after you have your 3 to 5 seeds in your seed cell, The third thing that you want to do is a second round of watering. So now that we've got the seeds in there, we're going to do an additional turkey base of water into each one of these seed cells. This is ensuring that the seeds are getting wet. Again, for them to germinate, they need to be moist, and all that water is going to be absorbed into the seedling mix. So it's going to stay as a nice and moist environment for them once we put them underneath the grow lights. So we now have our seeds in our seed cells. We've added some water. We're pretty much already done in terms of getting these seeds started. The next thing that we need to do is just lightly cover them. And we're going to cover them with about 1 centimeter, a ½ inch of seedling mix. I've done tons of experimenting on this because this is another one of those things that just like kept me up at night. I was so worried, am I planting my seeds too deep, too shallow? And so I literally started seeds like on the surface, underneath just barely a sprinkle at 1 centimeter or a ½ inch deep, at 1 inch deep, 2 inches deep, and 3 inches deep. So literally like I planted seeds at the very bottom of the seed cell, and I had germination across the board from the top ones all the way at the top, all the way down to 3 inches deep at the bottom. So do know that there is a lot of variance for how deep you can plant your seeds. It's not something that you need to stress or worry about. And if you plant everything at 1 centimeter or a ½ inch deep, that's like a perfect, just like all-purpose depth to be going at. It's what I start all of my seeds at. So once you have covered your seeds with about 1 centimeter, a ½ inch of seedling mix, last thing that you need to be doing is just adding one more turkey base of water. So this is our third round of water, 1 turkey base going into each one of the seed cells. And just like that, they literally have everything that they need in order to germinate and begin growing, except for one thing. We need to make sure that they're in a warm environment. So the 5th and final step for going about starting your seeds is to then move them from underneath or wherever you started them, to move them underneath the grow light and ensure that that room is at least 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. As you can see, I've got my thermometer right there just to make sure that that area is, again, at that temperature. And like I literally still to this day have my thermometer right off of my seed starting station. I just pulled it off right there. I always have it in here. I'm always keeping an eye, making sure that it's at least that warmth. This is probably the biggest thing that like people don't get germination and they're wondering, why did my seeds not germinate? It's probably because the room wasn't warm enough. So have that on hand, make sure that it is a nice and warm environment. If you've done those 5 steps that I just walked through, I guarantee you are going to have germination on your seedlings. Like I guarantee they will germinate. But the one thing that will change that we now need to start thinking about now that we've got them started is, when do I water my seedlings? So we've popped them underneath the grow lights and we've given them a nice round of watering so they don't need to be watered right now. But of course, as they're underneath that grow light, the grow light's going to be giving off a little bit of heat. The room is also going to be, 70 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. That seedling mix is going to begin drying up. And the thing is that this is going to vary for each and every one of us. So don't follow a strict schedule, but rather take note from what the seedling mix is telling you. And so when you look at your seed cells, if the seedling mix is looking like dark chocolate, and if you place the back of your hand on that seedling mix and you feel some moisture, this like you don't need to do any more watering at that point. There still is moisture in that seedling mix. But if your seedling mix is looking more like milk chocolate, like this one on the right-hand side here, and if you place the back of your hand onto that seedling mix and there's no moisture on it, it is time to do that next round of watering. So to help you all with that, tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sending each and every one of you this seed starting tracker. And on it, it's got a little checklist so that every single one of the materials that you need to have, you can make sure that you have them on hand before you start your seeds. And then on top of that, there's also this little checklist down here where you can share or you can write down every vegetable that you started, the date that you started on, once again, double checking that the temperature is warm enough, and then keeping track of when you're watering. And what you will see on here is that I have put like as just like a starting point is what I would call it, watering every 3 days. But again, if it's a warmer environment for you, or if you don't have compost in your seedling mix, it's going to dry up much more quickly. So it's going to vary for each and every one of us. Feel free to cross those out as you begin feeling out kind of like what is the right cadence for you. So let's go through this. Let's actually walk through the seeds that I just started in that video. That was tomato, kale, basil, zucchinis, and cucumbers. And that was day 0. And I know that I just watered them before I put them underneath there, so I don't need to do any additional watering. Well, let's now fast forward to day 3 and let's see how they're looking. So on day 3, as we can see, no germination, no germination, no germination, but I think our first kale seedlings just started to poke through there. And the seedling mix was starting to look a little bit lighter. So I'm going to do my first round of watering, which is 1 turkey base of water. So then we go back to our seed starting tracker, and I can add in here little check marks that I did all the watering on that day. Okay, day 3 is all done. Let's now fast forward to day 6, and let's see how we're looking on day 6. The basil has now germinated. The first zucchini has germinated. All 5 tomato seedlings have already germinated. This is going to be happening for each and every one of you over the course of March and April here when you start your seeds. The kale has also germinated, as well as the cucumbers. And so I'm going to do my next round of watering here. 1 turkey paste going into each one of those seed cells. And I go back to my seed starting tracker and I add in a little check mark to make sure that I've done my watering for that day. And you can also now add in here the number of seeds that have germinated. So this is going to probably help kind of keep you on pace with your seed starting. Again, I just want to try and help out as much as possible to ensure that you get tons and tons of thriving seedlings. Last thing that I want to show you is let's now fast forward to day 24. So we're now a few weeks into our seed starting. And folks, this is what's going to happen for each and every one of you. I promise, I promise, I promise it's going to happen. Take a look at this. The zucchini is like, get me out of here. You need to transplant me right now. The tomatoes, they're absolutely thriving. We can see the basil underneath there. Our cucumbers are also green, lush, super happy. And the kale is also saying, it is time to get me into the garden. So folks, you utilize the materials that I walked you through. You utilize the kind of the method that I walked you through, those 5 simple steps. And I guarantee that these are going to be the results that you're seeing. So folks, that is everything that I wanted to cover off on in terms of materials and method for starting seeds. I'd love to hear in the chat function, how has this been for everybody? Has this been useful? Have you learned something new? And as some of those roll through, just 2 more pieces I want to share with you is that if you did want to grab that VivoSun Grow Light, there is a link to it in the description of the video, and there is a 15% off code in there. And then if you did want to utilize that Mind and Soil seedling mix, on this one, I can say all of it is made in Canada. It's all packaged up at my house here in Squamish. So if you are looking to kind of like buy a little bit more locally, you could grab that. And on top of that, if you grab the 444 organic fertilizer on the website, that'll make your order over $100, and I will ship it to you for free. I'll personally pay for the shipping on it to get it out to you. I'd be stoked about that because then I know you've got an amazing seedling mix in your hands. And just on that note, this number, 87 5-star reviews, it's now up to like 125-star reviews. Just look at Allison's mention here. I love your seedling mix. Honestly, the tomato and pepper starts were out of the starting gate so much faster than previous years and seem stronger and happier too. If you can send me that link, I will gladly put in an order for your transplant kit. So again, works super well. But again, the critical piece of information is that it's done alongside the grow light. So those are 2 pieces there. All righty, folks. That is everything that I want to cover off on here. I would absolutely love to now open it up for any questions that anybody has. All righty, so just a quick question here from Nadine. Is your seedling mix the same as your worm casting mix? Nadine, this is the new version of that worm casting mix. So this is kind of like the latest and greatest version. Anything that is ordered on the website would be the new recipe that's performing super, super well for me. All right, thanks so much for the kind words there, Shelly. Thanks, Cal, appreciate it. All right, let's see some questions here. I am really curious to hear your thoughts on this one, Kirsten. This is from Michelle, and she's asking, are you using filtered water or are you using tap water? What have you done in the past?
I've only ever used tap water. I don't have any, concerns with my tap water where I am. It's all just fairly standard. So yeah, I haven't used any filtered water. What about you?
Yeah, it's one that I haven't experimented with yet, but I am curious about it. And so if anybody's wondering like the rationale or why this would be a curiosity is because in compost and worm castings, et cetera, there's this incredible like microbial life, bacteria, and enzymes that really kind of like help our plants develop a nice and strong, almost like immunity system. And if we use tap water that might have chlorine in it to ensure that there isn't anything bad growing in it, that could ultimately result in harming those microbes, that bacteria, those enzymes in the seedling mix. So there's a case to be made of using either filtered water or collecting rainwater and utilizing that. That is a future experiment that I'm going to do at some point in time. Just haven't gotten around to it just yet. Okay, I've seen a couple questions in here just in regards to the seedling mix and if there are worm castings in it. And so for everybody that's wondering on that front, this is a massive curiosity of mine. I actually have another experiment going where I'm comparing worm castings, 5 different brands versus compost. And what I'm seeing at the moment is that when we're utilizing like 30% compost in our seed starting mix, yes, the worm castings are good and things are growing well in there, but they're not growing better than just that amount of compost. And compost is so much cheaper, so much more cost effective than worm castings. And so I personally right now am like using less and less worm castings and using more and more compost. And so I'll continue to be doing experiments on that. Again, definitely ensure that there's either worm castings or compost in there. And if you're looking for like the more cost-effective solution, I'm not seeing any negative results by just utilizing 30% compost instead of worm castings. But stay tuned for more results on that front coming up. Okay, I'm going to pop down to the questions here. Okay, question from Sage here. How close should we keep the grow lights from the seedlings? Kirsten, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, you don't want them to be too close or too far, so there's definitely a bit of a sweet spot there, but it can be a bit of a range. I tend to keep it about 6 inches or so above. If they're too far, you can end up with leggy seedlings, which we of course don't want. But if it's too close, there is a bit of heat that can come off them, even with LED bulbs. So you don't want it to be too close. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that, in so many ways, what I saw in that experiment was that it totally depends on the grow light that you have, right? So the VivoSun and the Moneos grow light, they were hung the same distance away from the plants, but obviously the VivoSun grew significantly better. However, if I lowered that Moneos grow light so that it was a little bit closer, then those seeds, they wouldn't have been as like they would have done a little bit better. I still don't think that they would have grown as well as the VivoSun, but they would have done better. And so what I encourage everybody to do is to download that app. It's called Light Meter, and this is on Android. So keep this in mind. But the reading that I like to look for on that is around 40,000 lux. So go with that. Now, if you are on an Apple device, there is a Light Meter app. I'm not as familiar with it because I am on an Android. But what you can do is basically on a sunny day, just take it outside and face it directly at the sun and see what that reading is. And just ensure that it's never lower than that. That's the one thing that you're going to want to make sure that you're paying attention to. All right. Let's see if we've got some more questions in here. Another one that I saw in there was, how long do you leave the grow lights on for? And Kirsten, just kind of curious if you've got any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I personally, so I've got a little grow light, personally, and I leave it on for about 14 hours a day. I think a range between 12 to 16 is generally pretty good. So yeah, 14's kind of my middle spot there, but I'm also not super specific. I kind of wake up and I turn it on shortly after when I'm drinking my coffee, and then as I'm getting close to going to bed, I turn it off. So I'm saying approximately 14 hours, but that's
Love it.
just because I sleep about 8 hours and there's
Yeah.
a bit of wiggle room there.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think that's a super good time frame. Anything, honestly, folks, like anything in the 12 to 18 hour range is super good. Okay, let's see our next questions here. Okay, this is a good one. I want to hear your thoughts on this one, Kirsten. Uh, peat moss versus coco coir. Do you believe in utilizing peat moss? Are you against utilizing peat moss? Are you on board with coco coir? What are your thoughts there?
So yeah, that one's kind of a complicated one. Of course, peat moss is definitely the industry standard. Most of the standard potting soils that you're going to find are going to be between 70 to 75-ish% peat moss. It is something that is widely available in Canada, but it is not a renewable resource because basically it takes so long to create more peat that it's essentially non-renewable. Coco coir, that one has to be imported, so that's not really perfect either. Uh, I think it depends on the person and where the priorities lie. I
Totally.
mean, as a farmer, the standard is definitely peat moss, just because that's you're buying so much potting soil that that's the standard.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Where it totally is I think dependent on the values of the individual, and so if we were to have like the most environmental option on this end of the spectrum, that'd be to not use any peat moss or any coco coir. It'd probably use a combination of like the native soil that you have plus compost, because compost is just a waste product that we're now beginning to utilize. And then coco coir, that's a byproduct of another, industry standard. So if you are looking for a good, like super sustainable option, and wanting to do something on that front, then definitely explore coco coir options. And then I'd say again, like the most readily available option would be peat moss. So that is, another option on there, and it's definitely like very commonly utilized, just, because of that. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm seeing a couple Canada, USA things in the comments there. We do have folks on the call here from Canada and folks from the USA. So definitely not going to recommend just one or the other, as I want to be respectful of everybody here. Okay, this is a great one from Elaine here. Will you show how you divide the plants to put them into the garden? Kirsten, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've got these seedlings that are now growing, and at a certain point in time, you are going to be transplanting them into the garden. Do you have any particular way for how you thin them, rip them, separate them as you're transplanting them into the garden there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very delicately is the key. Yeah, the way Jordan does it in those 3-inch pots. I mean, you could see in the pictures they are separated around the cells, which is a key part of when you're planting. You don't want to plant, let's say you're doing 5 seeds, you wouldn't want to plant them all in that center area there because you're going to
Yeah.
have a very hard time separating them. So definitely give them enough space so that you can separate them. But yeah, I would want to lift probably the whole thing out of the pot and then gently tease the roots apart so that you're not damaging any roots and you can transplant them successfully. Or you can also seed them into individual 1-inch cells, and then you don't have
Yeah.
to worry about that either if you've had failures in the past.
Totally, yeah, and this is one that I'm super curious about. So I'm going to be doing some experimenting this year, where I'm going to basically, like what I've done in the past is I just rip them right down the middle. Obviously a little bit traumatic to the roots. I haven't lost any plants, so it's like it hasn't been detrimental to that extent. But I am curious if maybe I am hurting the plants a little bit, and so this year I'm going to do like half of them ripped, and then the other half I'm going to just like thin out the other ones and only plant one from that particular seed cell, so as to disturb the root system as little as possible. So I'm going to be really curious to see what happens on that front. Great question from Henry here. What's the best spacing for brassicas, Brussels sprouts, etc.? Kirsten, any thoughts from you on that one? Spacing for brassicas?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I can't say for sure what you would recommend, Jordan, because as a farmer, you would probably stick a little bit more strictly to planting recommendations. So I'd probably say about 1.5 foot for as a general rule of thumb, maybe 15 to 18 inches apart. But I think you can go a little tighter in a garden. So I'll pass that one back to you.
I love it. Honestly, you read my mind. I go at 18 inches, and I have gone closer. I have gone off of like 1 foot, especially for cabbages. But what ends up inevitably happening for me is like the leaves just get so big that like one or two of them ends up getting shaded out. So it always like for me, it always when I plant them at 18 inches, I'm like, oh, I could for sure fit way more in here. And then I'll try and like fit one extra one in there. And like with every single time, it just gets shaded out by the other ones. So I go off of about 18 inches for my brassicas. Great question there. Uh, from Kenneth, how much water is contained within one full turkey baste? I believe it is about 1 ounce. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it's around that range, or like or around like a quarter cup if that's the same amount. But yeah, in that range. All righty. From Deb, do you use fertilizer at the time of transplanting? Chris, would love to pass that one over to you. So you're transplanting the beautiful thriving seedlings now out into the garden. What do you do in terms of fertilization at that point?
Yeah, so I normally go twofold. So, I mean, always compost, normally kind of at the time of bed preparation. So maybe not exactly right before I'm transplanting, but I'm going to count that as part of the nutrients that I'm providing those seedlings. So I'll have prepped the beds, either in a field, in a garden bed, with some compost, and then I'll also generally just add a 444, just because it provides a little bit of everything that the plant needs. You know, it's something for the vegetative growth, something for root growth, and then just general, yeah, it's just good. It's just all
Yeah.
your multivitamin essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like I think that's such a good way of thinking about it is that you if we were to think of transplanting a seedling similar to like raising a baby, that compost is like the meals that they're being fed, or as a young kid that they're being fed. And then the organic fertilizer, the 444, that's kind of like a multivitamin that they'd be having just to make sure that like all those extra little areas are all nicely topped up. So you wouldn't want to do just organic fertilizer because then the soil wouldn't be in great shape. But the combination of the two, organic fertilizer plus something like a 444 organic fertilizer, absolutely amazing combination. And I do think that, yeah, like, like for myself, there's so many different, and I saw a question in there about, is Berrytone a good strawberry fertilizer? There's so many different like fertilizers and options and, just, products that exist out there. I literally use 444 on every single thing that I plant. Whether it is tomatoes, whether it's flowers, whether it's like my berry trees, like my blueberry bush. I just go with that across the board and it works super, super well. I am going to do some experimentation on that this year, just in terms of like, how big of a difference does it make if you utilize a tomato specific fertilizer versus a just standard 444? My guess is it's going to make zero difference whatsoever, but stay tuned for that one coming up. All right. I think we'll answer maybe one more question here. And yeah, this is a good one. I saw a question earlier about, what about sea soil? And then just kind of like what compost do you use? And so in the experiment that I'm doing right now, that is where I'm comparing composts versus fertilizers, I am using sea soil in one of those environments. So 66% ProMix, 33% sea soil. And it is actually the lowest performing out of all the ones in there. And I even sifted out all the wood chunks that were in there. So it was only like just like organic matter in there. So it has not been performing very well for me whatsoever. Now, the compost that I do utilize in my products, like in the seedling mix, the one that I've been sharing and showing you guys over the course of the session, it is from Sea to Sky Soils. So they're based up towards Whistler, Pemberton area. But then they have like they distribute it here where I live in Squamish. And I go with their 100% organic compost amender. Now, the thing is, though, is that like the vast majority of you aren't in this neck of the woods. So that's a little bit irrelevant. And the thing about compost is that it is like a very dynamic product. So this is going to be one of those things that is just like trial and error. So what you can do is you can get a couple of different options of either bag compost or from a soil depot, and then begin experimenting and testing to see which one you like the most. It's a little bit of work for sure, but it's going to allow you to get to know things. And if you didn't want to worry about that, again, like I do sell the seedling mix, so you could get your hands on that. And I've tried a whole bunch of different composts to ultimately arrive at the one that is performing best for me. Okay. All righty. Compost materials, 100% green waste is what I go with, but there absolutely could be, yeah, something like a mushroom compost. You could totally utilize that. You could also utilize something with some manure in it, especially if it was applying that compost into those garden beds. That's like a whole rabbit hole that we could go down in terms of, the different composts that are out there. Alrighty, and from James there, liquid fertilizer in seedlings. I've been playing around with it. I've been experimenting with it. I have not been seeing a major increase in growth as a result. So it does help a little bit, but again, it helps a ton if you don't have any compost in your seedling mix. But if you have 33% compost in your seedling mix, then you're going to be in a really great spot. Like I'm not seeing a massive increase when I then add it once there's already 33% compost in there. Alrighty, folks, that is everything for this evening. We'll go ahead and wrap up there as I can see the questions beginning to slow down. Thank you all for joining this evening. It was so great to have all of you. Appreciate you hanging with us with things crashing last week. I'm glad that we made it through this evening all smooth sailings. Keep your eyes peeled for that email from me tomorrow morning with that seed starting tracker in there. And then keep your eyes peeled for the next invitations as well for upcoming happy hours. But other than that, folks, go get those seeds started. We're officially into that time of the year where it is indoor seed starting season. Get them started, and we'll be here to support you all through the season. Have a great rest of your evening, everybody, and I'll speak with you soon. Take care, everybody.